Have you ever been an hour late to something that could change your life? That's the question Alara Sinclair asked herself as she burst through the cafe door on Christmas Eve, breathless and terrified. But the real shock wasn't that she was late. It was that he was still waiting, and he wasn't alone. Whitmore and Vine Cafe glowed like a snow globe on that Christmas Eve night. Soft jazz mixed with the scent of cinnamon and fresh pine. Outside, snowflakes drifted past windows lined with twinkling lights, coating the historic Burlington downtown in white silence. It was the kind of place where people went for blind dates and quiet conversations. The kind of place where magic felt possible. Inside, a man sat by the window with a little girl. Callum Ashford, 38 years old, CEO of Ashford Technologies, composed and elegant in a charcoal cashmere coat. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't touched it. Beside him, 7-year-old Willa drew pictures on a paper napkin with crayons the waitress had brought her. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she sketched what looked like 3 figures holding hands. The waitress approached for the third time, her expression sympathetic. "Sir, are you certain she's coming? It's been over an hour." Callum's eyes remained fixed on the falling snow. "She'll come." Willa looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, don't worry. Mommy in heaven told me the right person is always worth waiting for." Callum's heart clenched. 5 years ago, he hadn't waited. He'd been in a board meeting when Linnea called. He'd glanced at the screen, thought he'd call her back in 10 minutes. Linnea had a heart attack. By the time Callum reached the hospital, she was gone. 10 minutes. That's all it would have taken. 10 minutes to say goodbye. 10 minutes to tell her he loved her one last time. He would never let anyone feel the pain of arriving too late again. At the next table, an elderly couple whispered, "Such a handsome man, waiting with his daughter. What a shame to be stood up on Christmas Eve." But they didn't understand. Callum Ashford wasn't being stood up. He was giving someone the grace he'd never given himself. Across town, Alara Sinclair was fighting death itself. The shy nurse who'd been terrified about her blind date for weeks was now bent over an elderly patient, hands steady on his chest, counting compressions with fierce concentration. The code blue alarm still rang in her ears. Sweat dampened her scrubs. Her auburn hair had fallen from its careful bun, but she didn't notice. "Stay with me, Mr. Carraway," she whispered through gritted teeth. "Please stay with me. Your granddaughter's getting married next month. You promised to walk her down the aisle." Edmund Carraway, 78 years old, had been stable all day. Then his heart simply stopped. The monitor flatlined. 1 second, 2, 3. In the chaos, a monitor cable sparked against the metal gurney rail. Without thinking, Alara swept the sparking wire aside with her bare wrist, never breaking the rhythm of her compressions. The burn barely registered through her adrenaline. 4 seconds, 5, and then a blip, a heartbeat. Life returning. Dr. Harmon Thorne, the 68-year-old chief of cardiology, nodded with respect. "Excellent work, Sinclair. You just gave that man another chance at his granddaughter's wedding." Alara stepped back, hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:47 p.m. Her heart dropped into her stomach. The blind date. Christmas Eve. The man her friend Maren had spent weeks convincing her to meet. She'd completely forgotten. In the locker room, Alara fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers. Only then did she notice the angry red welt across her wrist where the cable had burned her. She'd deal with it later. The screen lit up with notifications that made her want to cry. 6 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 text message sent 70 minutes ago. She opened it with dread pooling in her chest, expecting anger, expecting disappointment, expecting all the things she'd heard before from people who couldn't understand why her job always came first. The message read, "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." Alara stared at those 7 words until they blurred. In 5 years of nursing, she'd apologized thousands of times. To boyfriends who couldn't handle her schedule, to friends who stopped inviting her to events, to family members who learned not to expect her at holidays. No one had ever said anything like this. No one had ever told her she was worth waiting for. She ran, through the hospital corridors, past startled colleagues, out the emergency exit into the freezing Vermont night. No time to change from her scrubs. No time to fix her appearance or catch her breath. Just pure panic and desperate hope as she flagged down a taxi and begged the driver to hurry. When Ilara burst through the cafe door at 9:02 p.m., every head turned. She stood in the entrance like a disaster given human form, wrinkled scrubs with someone's blood on the hem, hospital ID badge still clipped to her chest, snow melting in her disheveled hair, breathing hard from running the last block when the taxi got stuck in holiday traffic. And there he was, still at the table by the window, still waiting, but not alone. A little girl with honey-brown curls sat beside him, looking up from her drawing with curious eyes. Callum Ashford rose slowly from his chair. His expression held no irritation, no disappointment, just quiet understanding that made Ilara want to sink through the floor and cry at the same time. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, the words tumbling out. "There was a cardiac arrest. I couldn't leave him. I tried to call, but my phone was in my locker, and by the time I got out, he was coding again, and I know I should have." "You saved someone's life tonight." His voice was calm, warm, genuine. "Why would you ever apologize for that?" Ilara's breath caught in her throat. In 3 years since Declan Vega died while she was on her lunch break, no one had ever said anything like that to her. Everyone always wanted explanations, apologies, promises that next time she'd prioritize them instead. This man, this stranger who'd waited over an hour on Christmas Eve, was looking at her like she'd done something heroic instead of something unforgivable. "Please sit down," Callum said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Your coffee's cold, but I can order fresh." Before Ilara could respond, the little girl tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, she's pretty." Callum smiled softly. "She is. And she saves people like a superhero." Ilara felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not a superhero, sweetie. I'm just a nurse." Willa shook her head with the absolute certainty only a 7-year-old could possess. "Yes, you are. Mommy always said nurses are the real superheroes. She told me that before she went to heaven." The words hung in the air like snowflakes, beautiful and melancholy. Willa continued with the same matter-of-fact tone. "Maybe Mommy sent you. She said she'd send someone to help Daddy not be sad anymore." Ilara looked at Callum, saw the old grief surfacing in his eyes, and felt something shift between them. This wasn't just a blind date anymore. This was two wounded people recognizing their own pain in each other. "Your wife believed that?" Ilara asked quietly. "About nurses being superheroes?" Callum's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She did. She was a nurse herself, actually, like you." He paused. "And I lost her because I was too late." He reached across the table and pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward her. 2 sugars, no cream. Exactly what her dating profile said. "I'll never let anyone feel that way again." The first hour passed like minutes. Willa fell asleep against her father's shoulder, her half-finished drawing clutched in her small hand. Callum and Ilara talked in low voices, careful not to wake her. He told Ilara about Linnea, about the board meeting, about the phone call he didn't answer because he thought 10 minutes wouldn't matter, about arriving at the hospital to find his wife already gone, their 2-year-old daughter asking where Mommy was. "I've spent 5 years believing I killed her by not answering that call," Callum admitted, his voice rough. "Every day I wonder what if I'd picked up. What if I'd been there 10 minutes sooner?" Ilara's hands tightened around her coffee cup. 3 years ago," she said slowly, "I had a patient named Declan Vega. He was 24. Car accident. I was his primary nurse." She took a shaky breath. "I was on my lunch break when he coded. 12 minutes getting coffee from the cafeteria. By the time I got back, he was gone." The words felt like broken glass in her throat. 3 other nurses were there. They did everything by protocol, but he still died. And I've spent 3 years believing if I'd been there, he'd be alive." Callum leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "You're carrying that lunch break like a murder conviction. But Ilara, you were allowed to eat. You were allowed to take care of yourself. What if being human isn't enough? Then none of us are enough." His voice was gentle but firm. "But I think we're supposed to be human, not perfect. I think the people who love us would rather have us imperfect and present than destroyed by trying to be everything." No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever given her permission to be less than perfect. Willa stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about angels. Callum stroked her hair gently, and Alara watched the tenderness in his movements with an ache in her chest. "She's beautiful," Alara said softly. "She's my reason for everything." Callum looked up. "After Linnea died, I wanted to disappear, but Willa needed me. So I stayed. And slowly, I learned how to live again." "What changed tonight?" Callum's smile was small but real. "You ran into a cafe in bloody scrubs, apologizing for saving a man's life. And I thought, there's someone who understands. Someone who carries the same weight." Ilara felt tears threatening. "I don't know how to put it down." "Neither do I, but maybe we could learn together." At 11 p.m., the cafe began closing. Callum carried sleeping Willa to his car, and Ilara walked beside them through the softly falling snow. "Can I drive you home?" he asked. "I should probably get back to the hospital. My shift technically ended at 8, but I want to check on Mr. Carraway." Callum didn't argue, didn't complain, didn't make her feel guilty for putting her patient first. He simply said, "I'll drive you there." At St. Catherine's Medical Center, Ilara hesitated before getting out of the car. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting, for understanding, for being nothing like what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd make me feel guilty for being late. Someone who'd want an apology." Callum's eyes were warm in the dim light. "You don't owe anyone an apology for saving lives, Alara. Not ever." From the back seat, a small, sleepy voice piped up. "Daddy, is Alara coming to Christmas breakfast?" Callum laughed softly. "Willa, we just met her." "But I like her, and you never laugh like this." Ilara felt her heart crack open just a little. "I'd love to," she heard herself say. "If the invitation's real." Callum's smile reached his eyes for the first time all night. 7 a.m. "I make terrible pancakes, but Willa likes them anyway." Christmas morning was chaos and laughter, and the best terrible pancakes Alara had ever tasted. Willa showed her every toy she'd gotten from Santa. Callum told stories about burnt dinners and bedtime negotiations. And slowly, carefully, Alara felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching. Someone who had no intention of letting this newfound happiness survive. 15 miles away, in the sleek offices of Ashford Technologies' Burlington headquarters, Corinne Bellamy stared at her phone with cold fury in her eyes. The location tracker she'd installed on Callum's phone showed he'd been at a cafe in Burlington for over 2 hours last night, then at the hospital, then at his home, where someone had arrived at 6:55 this morning and still hadn't left. Corinne had given Callum Ashford 7 years of her life, 7 years of holding his company together while he grieved, 7 years of late nights and early mornings and sacrificing her own relationships because she believed he'd eventually see her, really see her. She'd sat with him on the anniversary of Linnea's death. She'd held his hand when he couldn't stop crying. She'd convinced herself that patience and devotion would eventually be rewarded with his love. But he'd never looked at her the way he was probably looking at this stranger right now. A nurse, a nobody, a woman who'd been an hour late to their first date. Corinne opened her laptop and began to dig. By noon, she knew everything. Ilara Sinclair, 31, ICU nurse at St. Catherine's Medical Center. Excellent performance reviews, no disciplinary actions. No obvious weakness to exploit. But everyone had a weakness. Everyone had something to hide. Corinne kept digging. At 11:47 p.m. on December 27th, she found what she needed. An anonymous email was sent to St. Catherine's Medical Center's HR department. To whom it may concern. Eyewitness nurse Ilara Sinclair abandoned her assigned station to meet with a male visitor during her shift on December 24th. She appeared distracted and was absent from her patients for an extended period. As a concerned citizen who values patient safety, I urge you to investigate this dangerous breach of professional duty. Corinne routed the email through Ashford Technologies' backup server, masking her identity. It would be untraceable. The accusation just credible enough to require investigation. She pressed send with a smile. Once Alara's reputation was destroyed, Callum would realize what a mistake he'd made. He'd come back to the woman who'd always been there. He'd finally see Corinne. On the morning of December 28th, Ilara arrived at St. Catherine's floating on a cloud of unexpected happiness. She'd spent Christmas Day with Callum and Willa, watching movies and making cookies, and feeling like part of a family for the first time in years. Callum had kissed her cheek when she left that night, soft and tentative and full of promise. His text at 6 a.m. had made her smile so wide her face hurt. Willa is already asking when you're coming back. I think I am too. The smile died when she was summoned to Genevieve Holbrook's office at 9 a.m. Genevieve, the chief nursing officer, was a formidable woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She'd always been fair to Alara, always supportive, but today her expression was grave. We received a complaint, Genevieve said, sliding a printed email across the desk. We're required to investigate. Alara read the words with growing horror. Abandon her assigned station. Distracted, absent from her patients. This isn't true, she said, her voice shaking. I never left my station to meet anyone. The complaint says you left to meet a male visitor and were away for an extended period. That's a lie. I was performing chest compressions on Mr. Carraway from 7:45 to 8:30. Then I covered pediatrics until midnight. I spoke to someone in the hallway during my scheduled break, maybe 90 seconds total. Genevieve's expression didn't change. Then you won't mind if we review the security footage and shift logs. Review everything. I have nothing to hide. But even as she said it, Alara felt the ground crumbling beneath her. Someone was trying to destroy her, and she didn't know why. She made it to the supply closet before the tears started. 3 years of carrying guilt about Declan Vega. 3 years of being perfect, of never taking breaks, of arriving early and staying late and doing everything right. And now someone was trying to take it all away with lies. The supply closet door creaked open. Alara quickly wiped her face, expecting a colleague who needed supplies. Instead, Patricia Carraway stood in the doorway, 75 years old with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen 6 decades of marriage. I thought I might find you here, Patricia said softly, lowering herself onto an overturned bucket with the careful movements of someone whose joints weren't what they used to be. The nurses at the station said you disappeared. I had a feeling. Mrs. Carraway, you should be with your husband. Edmund is sleeping, and he would want me here. Patricia reached out and took Alara's trembling hands. I heard about the complaint. The whole floor is talking. Alara's composure shattered. It's not true. I never left him. I would never. Sweetheart, I know. Patricia's voice was firm. My Edmund told me everything this morning. He was awake during the compressions. He heard every word you said. Alara stared at her. He was conscious? Drifting in and out. But he heard you talking about our granddaughter's wedding. About how he had to stay because he promised to walk her down the aisle. Patricia's eyes glistened. He said your voice was the rope he held on to, the thing that pulled him back. She pressed something into Alara's hands. A card, homemade, with slightly crooked letters on the front that read, Thank you, Nurse Alara. Open it. Inside were signatures, 14 of them. Edmund's children, his grandchildren, his brother from Seattle, his sister-in-law who never missed a family gathering. That's from the whole Carraway family, Patricia said. 14 people who still have Edmund because of you. Alara traced the signatures through her tears. 53 years ago, Patricia continued, I was a nurse too. Did you know that? Worked the night shift at Boston General before I married Edmund. Alara shook her head. I know what it's like. The weight of it, the way you carry every patient you couldn't save like stones in your pockets. Patricia squeezed her hands. But you have to count the ones you did save too, sweetheart. Otherwise, the stones will drown you. How do you know about the patient you lost? The young man? Patricia smiled sadly. Because I see it in your eyes. The same look I had for years after I lost a mother in childbirth. 26 years old. I was on my break when she hemorrhaged. The parallel hit Alara like a wave. How did you let it go? I didn't. Not completely. But I learned to carry it differently. Not as punishment, but as purpose. Patricia stood slowly. That young man you lost, he's part of why you fought so hard for my Edmund. Part of why you didn't give up. She cupped Alara's face in her weathered hands. Don't let anyone make you forget who you are. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and anyone who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. Later that afternoon, Dr. Harmon Thorne found Alara in the hospital chapel. The old cardiologist sat beside her on the wooden pew, his presence calm and steady as always. "I heard about the complaint," he said. "Does everyone know? This is a hospital. Secrets survive about as long as cafeteria donuts." He turned to face her. "I also heard you think this might derail your career." Ilara stared at her hands. "If they don't believe me, they'll believe you because the evidence will prove you're telling the truth. But that's not what's really bothering you, is it?" She was silent for a long moment. 32 years ago, Dr. Thorne continued, "I made a mistake that nearly killed a patient. I carried that stone in my pocket for a decade before I learned the difference between guilt and grief." "What's the difference?" "Guilt says you did something unforgivable. Grief says you're human, and humans make mistakes." He paused. "You're not carrying guilt about this complaint, Ilara. You're carrying guilt about Declan Vega. You have been for 3 years." Ilara's breath caught. "I've watched you work since you transferred here. You're one of the finest nurses I've seen in 40 years. But you're trying to resurrect that young man by being perfect for everyone else. You stay late. You skip breaks. You apologize for existing." His voice gentled. "Declan Vega didn't die because you ate lunch. He died because his injuries were catastrophic. Believing otherwise isn't honoring him. It's torturing yourself. How do I stop?" "You start by accepting that you're allowed to be imperfect, and you let the people who care about you help carry the weight." Ilara thought about Callum, about the way he'd waited without complaint, about the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. "I met someone," she whispered, "someone who understands what it's like to carry ghosts." Dr. Thorne smiled. "Then maybe it's time you let him help." At that exact moment, Callum Ashford received an urgent message from his IT director. "Mr. Ashford, we flagged an anomaly. On December 27th at 11:43 p.m., there was unauthorized access to our backup communications server using VP Bellamy's credentials. An email was routed through our systems to St. Catherine's Medical Center. Full forensic logs attached." Callum opened the attachment, read the email Corinne had sent, read it again. His hands curled into fists on his desk. 7 years of trust. 7 years of believing Corinne was a loyal colleague and friend. And she'd used his company's systems to attack an innocent woman whose only crime was making him smile again. He called his head of IT security. "David, I need a complete forensic analysis of the backup server access from December 27th. Everything." "Already done, sir. Comprehensive report will be in your inbox within the hour." "And David, has Ms. Bellamy accessed that server before?" A pause. "3 times in the past month. Always late at night. Always after hours." Callum's voice was ice. "Document it all." At 8 a.m. on December 29th, Callum walked into St. Catherine's Medical Center with a folder that would change everything. Genevieve Holbrook nearly dropped her coffee when her assistant announced that the CEO of Ashford Technologies was requesting an urgent meeting. Callum entered her office with the controlled intensity of a man on a mission. "Ms. Holbrook, the complaint against Nurse Sinclair was fabricated." He placed the folder on her desk. "This contains complete forensic documentation proving the email originated from my company's servers, sent by my VP of Communications using masked routing. She believed it would be untraceable. She was wrong." Genevieve scanned the documents. Server logs, IP traces, timestamp analyses. "This is comprehensive," she said slowly. "Nurse Sinclair's career is at stake based on lies." Steel edged Callum's calm voice. "She did not leave her post. I was at this hospital that evening. When the code blue alarm sounded at 7:47, I was in the corridor. I observed Nurse Sinclair through the window performing chest compressions. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, saving Edmund Carraway's life." "You witnessed the code from the hallway?" "Yes, afterward, I spoke briefly with her in the corridor. She was on her scheduled break. Our conversation lasted 90 seconds. That's the sum total of our interaction during her shift." Genevieve sat back. "You didn't have to come here personally, Mr. Ashford. I've watched too many good people destroyed by lies while everyone stands by." His voice hardened. "Ilara Sinclair deserves better than to have her reputation questioned because someone at my company couldn't handle their jealousy." Genevieve picked up her phone. Cancel the investigation into Alara Sinclair immediately. Add a formal commendation to her file for her exemplary response during the Christmas Eve Code Blue. 1 hour later, Corinne Bellamy entered the executive conference room at Ashford Technologies expecting a routine meeting. She found Callum waiting with 2 HR representatives and the company's legal counsel. The folder on the table told her everything. Corinne, Callum's voice was deceptively calm. You use company resources to file a fraudulent complaint against a healthcare professional. You endangered her career, her reputation, and potentially patient safety by attempting to remove a skilled nurse from the workforce through lies. Corinne's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Callum, I was protecting you. That woman was an hour late to your first date. She was performing chest compressions on a 78-year-old man while you were plotting to destroy her. Your entire complaint was fabricated, and the forensic evidence proves it. Corinne's composure shattered. I gave you 7 years. Her voice rose to a near shriek. I held this company together when you couldn't get out of bed. I sat with you every anniversary of Linnea's death. I watched you suffer, and I stayed. Her hands clenched into fists. I waited for you to see me, to realize I was right here, that I understood you better than anyone ever could. Her voice cracked. And then you meet a stranger on a dating app and suddenly she's worth more than everything I've done? Callum's expression didn't waver. I never promised you anything, Corinne. I valued you as a colleague and a friend. But love isn't something you earn through time served. It isn't a reward for loyalty. But I loved you. You loved the idea of me. The idea of being the woman who saved me from my grief. But that's not love. That's obsession. He stood. And when reality didn't match your expectations, you tried to destroy an innocent woman. Corinne's eyes filled with tears. Please, everything I did for us. There is no us. There never was. Callum nodded to the HR representatives. Your employment with Ashford Technologies is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. As Corinne was let out, she turned back one last time. She'll never love you like I do, she spat. She doesn't know you like I do. Callum's response was quiet. No, she knows me better. Because she knows what it's like to carry guilt, and she doesn't expect me to be perfect. She just expects me to be human. Ilara was checking Edmund Carraway's vitals when she was summoned to Genevieve's office for the second time in 2 days. She expected termination. Instead, Genevieve slid a paper across the desk with something that looked almost like a smile. This is a formal letter of commendation for your exemplary emergency response on December 24th. The investigation is closed. The complaint was fraudulent, and the person responsible has been identified. Ilara stared at the paper, unable to process the words. How? Callum Ashford came forward with testimony and documentation. He witnessed your work on Christmas Eve. He provided forensic evidence proving the email was fabricated by one of his employees. When Ilara stepped out of the office, she found Callum waiting in the hallway. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from hard decisions and harder conversations. But when he saw her, his face softened into something like relief. You came here, she said. You brought evidence. You testified. Of course I did. But your VP, your company's reputation, the scandal this could cause. The reputation of my company means nothing if I allow it to become a weapon against someone whose only crime was being kind. He stepped closer. I couldn't let you be punished for something you didn't do. Ilara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Why? Why would you do all this for someone you barely know? Callum reached out, gently brushing a tear from her face. Because I know enough. I know you ran into a cafe on Christmas Eve, terrified you'd ruined our date because you'd been saving someone's life. I know you stayed with Edmund Carraway until you were certain he was stable. I know you've carried Declan Vega's death for 3 years, like it was your fault when it wasn't. His eyes held hers. And I know that when my daughter said you were a superhero, she was right. That's enough to know you're worth fighting for. 1 week later, a package arrived at Ilara's apartment. Inside was a handcrafted wooden box with 2 compartments lined with velvet. The note read, "For the moments worth remembering and the weight you're ready to release. See." The first compartment held a card. Every life you've saved. The second compartment was empty. Beneath the box was a letter. Ilara, I contacted St. Catherine's Records Department. In 3 years, you've been the primary responder for 147 successful emergency interventions. You've comforted 83 families during their darkest hours. You've been specifically requested by 41 patients who refused treatment from anyone else. Declan Vega was one patient on one terrible day, but you've had 1,000 good days since then. Days where you showed up and made the difference between life and death. Maybe it's time to let yourself count those days too, with more gratitude than I can express. Callum. Ilara cried for an hour, but these tears were different. Cleansing, healing. That evening, she stood alone in the memorial garden behind the hospital, a small courtyard she'd never known existed until Dr. Thorne mentioned it. She pulled out the paper she'd carried in her wallet for 3 years. Declan Vega's name, the date of his death, and the words, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." She added something new. "But I've been there for everyone since because of you. Thank you for teaching me why showing up matters. I forgive myself now." She folded the paper carefully and placed it in the empty compartment of Callum's box. It fit perfectly. New Year's Eve found Ilara on the porch of Callum's house, watching Willa attempt to catch snowflakes on her tongue in the backyard. "She's asked me 3 times today if you're going to be her new mommy," Callum said, handing Ilara a cup of hot chocolate. "What did you tell her?" "That it's too soon to know, that we're still figuring things out." He paused. "But I also told her that I really hope so." Ilara turned to look at him. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of needing you. Scared of failing you. Scared that I'll never completely escape the guilt." "Then be scared with me." Callum took her hand. "I'd rather be terrified together than safe and alone." "Is that what this is? What we're building?" "I think so." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I think this is 2 broken people learning that broken doesn't mean worthless. That scars don't mean we're unlovable." Willa came running up, cheeks pink with cold. "Daddy! Ilara! It's almost midnight. That's when the wishes come true." Callum laughed and scooped her up. "Is that so? What are you going to wish for?" Willa's face grew serious. "I can't tell you, but it's a really good wish." At midnight, as fireworks exploded over Burlington, Ilara felt Callum's arm around her shoulders and Willa's small hand in hers, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was carrying an impossible weight alone. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Ilara arrived at Whitmore and Vine Cafe 5 minutes early. She sat at the same table by the window, ordered 2 coffees and a hot chocolate, and waited. When Callum walked in with Willa, he stopped short in the doorway. "You're early," Ilara smiled. "I'm learning. Someone taught me that being on time isn't the same as being truly present. I want to be present now, for all of it." He crossed to her, Willa bouncing excitedly beside him. "Ilara, Mommy, look what I made." Ilara's heart still fluttered every time Willa called her that. It had started 6 months ago, tentative and questioning. Now it rolled off the little girl's tongue like the most natural thing in the world. Willa thrust a drawing at her. 3 figures holding hands, with a 4th, much smaller figure in the belly of one of them. "It's our family. See, that's Daddy, and that's me, and that's you, and that's the baby." Ilara looked up at Callum, her hand moving instinctively to the small swell of her stomach. "She's been working on that all week," Callum said softly. "Wanted it to be perfect." "It is perfect." Ilara pulled Willa into her lap. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen." Willa climbed closer, suddenly serious. Her small fingers found the faded burn scar on Ilara's wrist, the one from Christmas Eve a year ago, when she'd swept aside the sparking cable to save Edmund Carraway. "Ilara, Mommy, you know what I learned?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "My teacher said the best people aren't the ones with no scars. The best people are the ones who got scars helping others." Willa looked up with those serious 7-year-old eyes. "That's why Daddy loves you, and that's why I love you. Your scars mean you're brave." Ilara's tears fell freely. "When did you get so wise, little one?" "Mommy in heaven teaches me things when I'm sleeping." Willa snuggled closer. She said you're exactly the mommy she would have picked for me, and mommies in heaven are never wrong. Outside, snow began to fall, the same soft, forgiving snow from a year ago. 1 year ago, Callum said, you were an hour late, and you waited. Best wait of my life. Ilara reached across the table and took his hand. The wedding band on her finger caught the light. I still can't believe you waited an hour for a stranger. You were never a stranger. Callum's eyes were bright. You were the person I didn't know I was looking for. The answer to a question I was afraid to ask. The cafe was filling up with couples and families seeking warmth on Christmas Eve. A year ago, Ilara would have felt out of place among them, would have felt like an imposter pretending to belong. Now she understood. Belonging wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about arriving on time or never making mistakes. It wasn't about earning love through sacrifice and suffering. Belonging was about showing up, imperfect and scared and human, and finding people who showed up for you in return. I have something for you, Callum said. He pulled out a small velvet box. Ilara's breath caught. We're already married. I know. He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace with a pendant of 2 interlocking hearts. But I wanted to mark this anniversary, 1 year since the night I waited, and you were worth every minute. He fastened the necklace around her throat. 1 heart for the past we've let go, he said. 1 heart for the future we're building, both intertwined, because that's what we are now. Connected. Unbreakable. Ilara touched the pendant, feeling its weight against her collarbone. I love you, she whispered. I love this family. I love the person I'm becoming with you. I love you too. All of you. The nurse who runs toward emergencies. The mother who reads bedtime stories in silly voices. The woman who still sometimes cries, but lets me hold her afterward. Willa made a face. Are you guys going to kiss? Because that's gross. Callum laughed. Maybe later. Promise? Promise. Willa pressed her face against the window, watching the snow. Mommy Linnea sent the snow, she announced. It's her way of saying Merry Christmas. Ilara pulled the little girl close. Then let's say thank you. Together, the 3 of them, soon to be 4, pressed their hands against the cold glass and whispered thank you to the snow, to the night, to all the moments of grace that had led them here. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones who arrive on time. They're the ones who arrive at exactly the right moment, when we finally believe we're worth saving. And sometimes the families we're meant to have aren't the ones we're born into. They're the ones we build, 1 moment of grace at a time, 1 hour of waiting, 1 word of forgiveness, 1 small hand reaching out to say, I choose you. Outside Whitmore and Vine Cafe, the snow kept falling. Inside, a family held on to each other and believed in second chances. And somewhere, an angel smiled. The end.